You ready? Okay. I'm Joe Kincheloe. I'm the Canada Research Chair in the Department of Integrated Studies and Education and the founder of the Paulo and Nita Freire International Project for the Study of Critical Pedagogy. Well, I was at City University of New York in the PhD program at the Graduate Center there and had a very wonderful job. I'd been able to help put together this program and help devise its purpose and its curriculum, and just had a wonderful situation. And wasn't looking to leave that, but when the Canada Research Chair came up and there was a possibility of applying for that, that really changed my opinion. And I came up, interviewed for the job, and it was just obviously a wonderful fit. There was a wonderful group of people to work with, an amazing group of students, and the possibility of forming this Critical Pedagogy Center, this Paulo and Nita Freire International Center for the Study of Critical Pedagogy, and took the opportunity. I'm the Canada Research Chair for Critical Pedagogy, and so critical pedagogy is basically, in the most simple, quick sense, the study of oppression in education, the study of how issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, colonialism will shape the nature of what goes on in education and shape the purpose of education. So in this context, what I'm doing is trying to put together an international center, an international project where we can bring people from around the world. We can create an open access internet space where we have people contributing to the critical pedagogical conversation. I oftentimes am really worried by the fact that critical pedagogy is a North American white boy appropriation of a South American thing. And so the purpose of the center is to make sure that it's a worldwide thing and that people from North America listen carefully to what people from Asia, from Africa, from South America, obviously, and from indigenous peoples all around the world have to say about the notion of oppression and how to fight it. The center really is, as much as anything, a manifestation of my respect for Paulo Freire and his wife, his widow now, unfortunately, Nita Freire. And in my life, just thinking about my intellectual influences, Freire was just such an important figure. In 1970, he had a book come out in English. It had been written in Portuguese originally in 1967. The book was called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I read it in 1970 and have been reading and working on Paulo's work ever since that time. And I think that Paulo certainly will be remembered. I want to help in making that happen as the greatest educator of the 20th century. Almost a saintly man in many ways. He was a wonderful scholar, completely dedicated to the eradication of human suffering, and just very, very human and funny and wonderful. It was a wonderful combination for a human being to possess. I want to do everything I can to honor his memory. As I said, I studied Freire for years and years, put together a study group for studying the work of Paulo in 1975, 1976, never thinking I'd have a chance to meet him. Just through the luck of being involved in a field and getting to know people. It's all about always who you know. But getting to know people, I was linked to him. And my good friend Donaldo Macedo invited Shirley and myself to come to Boston while Paulo was there. And Shirley and I and Donaldo and another friend of ours went out to Paulo's favorite Portuguese restaurant in Boston and sat for 4 hours, and he talked about radical love. and critical pedagogy. And it was just one of the most fascinating 4 hours. We bonded immediately because he was from the poorest area of Brazil, and I was from the poorest area of the U.S. And we just had such amazingly similar resonating stories about our childhood and about how we came to our ideological and pedagogical positions. And so from that moment on, you know, it was foreordained that we would work together with Paulo. We met his wife and we just loved her dearly. And Shirley and I were, you know, seeing him as much as possible, seeing Nita as much as possible, went and visited them in Brazil, had a wonderful time there. There's so many stories I can tell about this, but just to be with Paulo and coming from where I'd come from in a very poor area of the country and not thinking that I would ever have a chance to be around somebody like Paulo Freire, his friendship and his mentorship and his genius changed my life in so many ways. And wow, how many people have an opportunity to build a kind of enduring shrine, although Paulo would hate that term because he always hated the cult of celebrity, and very much was an ideal that I hold dear of a humble intellectual scholar. Paulo would say, okay, you can build the project around me, but you've got to critique my work and take it to the new level. Do not make me some type of icon. And so as much as I try, I will not make him an icon, though I love him and respect him dearly. I know that he would not want that. And so the Freire Center is to study Paulo's work, study critical pedagogy, have an evolving critical pedagogy that encounters new discourses, new peoples with new ideas, and continues to move forward in the 21st century. What's going on in education around the world is part of what I oftentimes call a recovery movement, a recovery of dominant power, whether it be colonial power with new forms of colonialism, whether it be gendered power with the recovery of new forms of patriarchy, whether it be racial power with new forms of the recovery of white supremacy, whether it be class power with the recovery of new forms of class elitism and a globalized empire that exists. And unfortunately, I think the evidence is pretty clear that no matter where we go around the world now, education plays the role of helping support that imperial behemoth and all of these recovery movements that are embedded within it. And as I go to schools, whether they be in Sigornsville, Tennessee, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Edmonton, Alberta, or Montreal, I see schools that many times unconsciously are arranged and developed in a way that simply perpetuates this behemoth, that punishes questions that I'm about subjects I'm talking about here, that would raise the issue of what's the purpose of schools? What type of people are returning out? How do they fit with these power relationships? Are they better equipped to address and help end human suffering than if they hadn't gone to school? Those are not questions that are typically talked about or asked in contemporary conversations about education. We're talking about raising test scores. And the raising test scores is, in a sense, a smokescreen, in a way, I think. It diverts our attention from these questions about what is the role of education in a democratic society? What kind of people do we turn out, and how do they relate to this power behemoth that I'm talking about? If we concentrate only on memorizing fragmented pieces of often untrue data and regurgitating them on a test score, we certainly are not talking about the very heart and soul the 800-pound gorilla with bad breath that's sitting in the room with us. Wow, education has got to come to grips with the fact it's being employed to serve the purposes of something that is not good in the world. I think that there have been a number of books and lots of articles written on the theme of the continuity of education despite changing technologies and changing zeitgeist and changing this or changing that. I mean, the world has changed dramatically in the last 150 years, yet when we go into the schools, we see, generally speaking, I mean, there's obviously differences, but generally speaking, we see the same types of education occurring in 2007 that we did 150 years ago. And most importantly, in that lack of change, that continuity, is that we still don't ask questions. We don't challenge students to ask questions about the types of power-related issues, about the purposes of schooling, about questions concerning what does it mean to be an educated person? What's the purpose of doing this? We just simply kind of mindlessly go in, recapitulate the status quo, teach the same data without questioning where it came from that we've taught, that we've dealt with for the last 150 years. And so in that way, education has remarkably stayed the same. And so I'm really excited, even though I'm depressed at the same time, I'm really excited about new questions that we can bring up in education, that we can bring new disciplinary perspectives, new ways of thinking about how we go about educating teachers to induce schools and students to think about these things, to induce teachers themselves to think about these things. I think teaching is one of the hardest jobs in the world. No doubt about that. It's hard. Yet at the same time, we do our teachers a tremendous disservice when we don't integrate them into the questions that drive the very nature of life at this time in human history. Those are almost separated from the process of educating teachers. And so what a critical pedagogy that I imagine does is engages teachers, school districts, parents, politicians in really rethinking the nature of the very questions we ask about schooling, about the nature of mind, about the possibilities that human beings can aspire to, about human potential itself, the idea of the mind and its possibilities, and the cognitive abilities that we can develop. God, that excites me. I am so excited about that. Yet you never hear that talked about in a public conversation on education. What's going on there that would have that kind of chasm between those two thoughts? They should be directly related to each other, and yet we're not even talking about them. My God, that's an amazing thought. There's a lot of things that we can do if we just use our educational and social imagination.
So with all of that in mind, what is normal?
What is normal is just absolutely a social construction. It's constructed in a variety of linguistic, social, cultural, political, linguistic types of ways. And I believe that it's nothing more than that, and it's nothing less than that. Now, at the same time I say that, we need to understand what that is and what that means for us, you know, in our present lives and the lives of other people. How does it contribute to human suffering? How does normal contribute to the quality of our lives? And then if we know that normal is simply a social construction, then that gives me tremendous hope. It gives me hope in the sense that, hey, we can remake it. The matrix can be reloaded. You know, we can begin to make something that was unimaginable in this notion of normality in the coming years around issues of sex, race, class, gender, rethinking the nature of colonialism and undermining it, getting rid of it, looking at how people are suffering around the world and alleviating that suffering. I think the last thing on earth I'd want to be is normal. You know, I like to be around people that are in a sense, transcendent of normal. That that notion of conforming people, which pedagogy often does, into a certain form of normality. And I'm not talking about just in elementary school or in high school. I'm talking about kind of bringing them into the normality of being a scholar or being an intellectual, being a public knowledge producer, is such an unsavory process for me, where certain types of behaviors and certain types of thinkings are allowed within that kind of construction of being a normal professor. That you have to express yourself in a certain way, that writing, you have to write with a certain voice, ad infinitum. We could go on and on with that. But the idea of being even normal on the level of what it is that we're supposed to be as public intellectual professors, to me, is repugnant. And I work really hard to try, not in a trite way, and I certainly don't always succeed with this, as you well know, but I try very hard to try to construct different notions of what it means to be an intellectual that, again, is always transforming and always evolving as the world evolves itself. And so in that context, the notion of what a scholar might be is so far from anything that has traditionally been thought of as normal within hyper-reality, within this particular zeitgeist, that normal professors are dinosaurs. They're just dinosaurs. They're antiques. I think I'd always wanted to teach as long as I could remember, but I quickly grew disillusioned with becoming a teacher once I found out what school was. I certainly didn't want to be a teacher in a school. And the situation, the moment that I realized that I did want to do it, I was thinking about doing a lot of other things, but the moment that I realized I can do this, I will do it, is when I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo, that I said, there's someone else in the world that actually thinks about school and thinks about the possibilities of school and being an educated person in the same way that I do. And that just was such a reassuring moment. It was not just an intellectually stimulating, but it was just a kind of psychologically reassuring moment that, yeah, I could go and be who I wanted to be, and do the types of things that I wanted to do, and to develop the pedagogical imagination that I wanted to develop, and actually go to an institution called a school and do that. That was quite a remarkable, moment for me, because I didn't think that that could happen. Of course, once I did it, I realized that the education imagination that I had was always somewhat of an impediment in me trying to become a teacher. Time will pass without me even realizing it. I could talk to a student for an hour and it feels like 10 seconds. I love teaching classes. To me, that's just, I don't think of it as work. Shirley will say, did you get any work done today? And I will have taught a class and had 6 hours of meetings with students, and I'll go, no, I didn't do any work today. And I realized, oh, well, that's what my job is. But I don't think of that as work. I think of my writing as work and my research. And even though I say it's work, I find I use that term because it is such a demanding and kind of all-encompassing process, and I'm exhausted when I get through. But as far as my love of it, I love it just as much as I love the other dimensions. So the idea of being a researcher, writer, getting a chance to talk to students, teaching classes, they'll have to carry me out. I'll never retire. I'll never retire.